Before we get started, I've got to tell you about three great companies. PickClick is the first. It's a one-person startup from my friend Ryan in San Diego. PickClick gives you a visual way to search eBay, Etsy, and other sites. Ryan is already doing 1 million product sales per month on pickclick.com. Not hits, but sales. Go to pickclick.com to see how he's doing it. 99 Designs, it's the largest crowdsourced marketplace for graphic design. When I used them, I wrote a description of the design I needed and how much I wanted to pay. I got a bunch of designs back. I gave each designer feedback. I picked the one I liked best, and that's the only one that I paid for. Try them for logo design. If you need a blog design, use them. If you need app icons, use them. There's so many different reasons why you might want to use them. Check out 99 Designs, and you'll see why so many past Mixergy guests have used 99designs.com. And Grasshopper, I've had them now as my longest sponsor for a reason. Not only does my audience love them, but you might have heard several guests here on Mixergy say that they use grasshopper.com as a result of these messages, and they love it. It's the virtual phone system that entrepreneurs like me love because it offers us multiple extensions, music on hold, call forwarding. It gives an impression of having a big professional organization, but also caters to your need to travel and to be flexible. Check out grasshopper.com. Here's the program. Hey everyone, it's Andrew Warner, founder of Mixergy.com, home of the ambitious upstart. I've got with me today Salman Khan. He is the founder of, an online school that's launched and run largely through YouTube. Do I have that right?
Yeah, it's known mainly for the video library on YouTube right now. There's 1,500 videos. It is being used. It's had over 16 million views, 200,000 unique users a month. It is definitely the most used education platform on YouTube, and as far as I can tell, looking at the other open course initiatives, the most used library on the web right now.
I went through the courses in preparation for this interview, and I saw that you teach math, basic math. You say you start out teaching 1 + 1 = 2. I got so into a history course that I almost stopped working, and I said, Andrew, you can't do this. So you know what I did? I used this program called Zamzar that's going to rip your course. It's going to put it on my iPhone. I'm going over to an estancia here this weekend. On the ride over, I'm going to be watching you teach me history. It was that freaking fascinating.
Oh, cool. Well, no, glad. And that's actually really good feedback because I get a lot of there's a lot of interesting discussion about how credentialed someone should be to teach a certain subject, and most of my credentials are in computer science and in finance and math, and I did the history. I love history, but I did that one to kind of push the boundaries to show that you don't have to necessarily have a PhD. You just have to have a passion for the subject. So I'm glad to hear that. And you hopefully won't have to rip it soon. It'll be on iTunes by the end of the summer. It'll be on iTunes U, the entire Khan Academy library.
I'm going to come back to that point that you said you don't have to have a PhD. I want to ask you about what qualifies you to teach all these subjects, because you're teaching more and more of them. You've got a course on how IPOs work, on how to raise money for a startup, all that. But let me start off by asking you a question that I ask a lot of my other guests here. How much money does the Khan Academy make?
Well, that answer could be answered on a bunch of different levels. It is a not-for-profit. That's a decision we can talk about because there was a kind of a thought process. I was being approached by some people in the venture capital and the entrepreneurial world about starting it as kind of either a social for-profit venture or a pure for-profit venture, or a little bit of both. But it is a pure not-for-profit. And there's a little bit of advertising that comes in. It goes to the not-for-profit, and we're being very delicate about the advertising, not too aggressive there. And when I quit my job as a hedge fund analyst in September, I was making nothing. So it was essentially living off of savings. And very recently, though, we've gotten
I'm sorry, the video just cut out when right after you explained that you quit your job as a hedge fund analyst, and then can you pick it up from there?
Oh yeah. So after I quit, I was living off of savings until about I would say about a month ago, where we've gotten some fairly significant donations. So now I can at least take a salary to do this. Not a hedge fund salary, but a salary.
And the donations are coming from people who are hitting that donate button on top of your website?
Well, yeah, there's a ton of people who are hitting that little PayPal donation, and that's anywhere from I've gotten donations as little as 50 cents all the way, but there's a lot of people who just donate unsolicited 100, 200, 300, 500. I've even gotten a couple of that were 2, 3,000 just from that PayPal donation button. But more recently, we've gotten some pretty significant checks from people out here in the Valley that have, get us to the point that I have runway to have a salary for at least, several years. And then obviously, there'll be other opportunities to backfill from there.
What kind of people?
They're, there a couple of them are venture capitalists in this area. One gentleman, actually he's not in the Valley. He's in Europe. He's a pretty prominent businessman in Europe. There's another. I mean, a lot of the people are people in the tech space. And they're not doing it as an investment. Obviously, it's a not-for-profit, but I think they're excited about the potential here, the potential for kind of disrupting. And I think the feedback I get for a lot of them is, look, a lot of people are doing this. A lot of people have talked about doing this type of thing. It's kind of an obvious idea. Take videos from good instructors, put them on the web, and then eventually do some analytics around it, do some self-paced learning, and everything's going to be great. But no one's really done it. The best to date outside of Khan Academy is the open courseware efforts at MIT and Stanford and all of that, and that's essentially just been videos in classrooms and
boring. Can I say that?
Yeah, you can say it, and I feel this. I'm a huge consumer of their open courseware, but you have to be really motivated and sit through a lot of things that you don't necessarily want to pay attention to get to what you want. And sometimes it's delivered well, sometimes it's not. It's kind of inconsistent quality, and there's all sorts of other things that occur when you have a video camera in a classroom that make it a little bit weird. But I think they appreciate the fact that Khan Academy is 99% execution and 1% talk.
So let me ask you this then. I got your resume here. I actually went to the Wayback Machine to see what you were up to before you did this, to see who you were, and you had your resume up, and I'm looking at it, pretty freaking impressive. In addition to 3 degrees from MIT, which a lot of us have seen in news stories about you, and the one from Harvard, you worked at Oracle, you worked at a venture capital firm, you were on a path to be one of these rich people of Silicon Valley. You're not going to be that now, right? Not through this.
No, yeah. Unless they make a movie about the Khan Academy, I won't. It's funny when I was working at a hedge fund. The 6 years after business school, I was a senior analyst at a hedge fund, and it was doing well. And then my manager retired. He encouraged me to start my own fund, so I was on that track to kind of be a hedge fund manager and all of that. But the whole time, I kind of rationalized that the only reason why I'm doing this is because I want to one day start a school. And in my mind, I didn't want to start a school, write grants and go to the Department of Education and get a charter and all of that. And I felt it would constrain me too much. I was like, no, I just want to become really rich and just do it on my own terms. So that was my rationalization for just trying to generate alpha day and night. But as the Khan Academy story goes, I kind of got an outlet for some of my ideas with my cousins, tutoring them virtually. And then the YouTube thing took off. I wrote a little software app. A lot of people are using that. And a lot of the vision started to become concrete a lot sooner than I had expected it to. And then there's just kind of a little bit of introspection, realizing that I got a lot more satisfaction out of, the hedge fund job is a great job, even irrespective of how much they may or may not compensate you. But this was just 10 times more fun. Just the impact, the almost everything I did on a daily basis. It kind of added to this library that could be around forever. My son, who's 15 months old right now, could use it when he's 18 or 30 or whenever. So that idea got really exciting, and just you think about it, and you see people in the Valley like this. I mean, and I think Silicon Valley is an interesting place because you do see this. It really isn't about money. I think so many people. They view the money as points, and they view it as kind of how important was my contribution to the world. And I think with Khan Academy, I get to do that without having to play the whole venture-backed startup game. And what's interesting about Khan Academy is, even though it's not going to make me any money, and I'm not going to be able to buy a nice house in Atherton and all of that type of thing, in terms of just impact, it is already kind of. It's getting more notoriety than many already, fairly successful startups. If I entered the startup world and I had an exit for, $10 or $20 million, that's a huge win. But those type of things are a dime a dozen out in the Valley. And the Khan Academy, and it's not like I'm, that's mine, but the Khan Academy I already feel has more impact than a lot of these, So from that point of view, it was just way more impact, way more fun. every day the things that I was contributing, I felt is contributing to kind of a lasting legacy, and just the letters you get from people. I mean, this was also another realization when you work at a firm, kind of the best thing that could happen to you is kind of a pat in the back from the boss or a nice bonus. But in this, I'm getting letters like 20 or 30 a day, and these letters are, some of them are just thank you, but some of them are like, I was going to fail algebra until I started using these videos, or now I want to be an engineer, and I thought I was bad at math my whole life. So when you get stuff like that, it really makes you say, hey, this is what I want to do.
How about this? I saw one letter on your website. Someone said that, I don't know where she was or where he was, but the letter went, where I live, black kids don't really have access to schools, and my mother moved me so I have more opportunities, and my teachers weren't doing it for me, and then I discovered your videos. Essentially, that was a story, and things changed.
Yeah, no, and that letter I actually put on my website. I view that as the letter that, on some level, convinced me to really quit my job. I mean, there were multiple other moments over the last, I would say over the last 3 years, where, Khan Academy, I got a letter or something like that, and I say, oh, maybe I'll do this full time or take time off from the hedge fund world. And then I would look at my finances and say, no, maybe I'll do the hedge fund world a little longer. But then I got that letter in August, late August of '09. And I got that letter in the same week that the Khan Academy had gotten some notoriety from the Tech Museum and the Microsoft Tech Award, and it was getting a little press. And I just kind of viewed it as a confluence of events that were telling me that I should be doing this. But that letter especially, I mean, I still think to date that's probably one of the definitely the top 5 letters that I've gotten. I mean, it's on the level of this. Without me really doing anything incremental for that person, they just consume these videos over a summer. It really changed their life.
By the way, people in the chat room they're so inspired. I see Dan Blank saying, this guy is really inspiring. We're only 10 minutes into the interview, and he's already inspired, he says. Such strong integrity from Joseph Jacks. Everybody here, they're just loving it. Holy crap from Joseph Jacks about your 3 MIT degrees. So you're blowing us away. Let's do this.
Well, and I'll add this as another kind of thing about making it nonprofit here, is that the goodwill that comes out from this is just orders of magnitude greater than anything. I mean, I'm convinced if I did it as a for-profit, it wouldn't have had the same level of goodwill. And there's we could talk more about that in general. But I think people respond well to it, and so people are coming out of the woodwork to really help as well.
So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to ask you about your vision long term, so I could continue to be inspired and inspire my audience. I want to find out how you got here, and then I want to ask you how you do it so well, because you're able to take subjects that you didn't spend your whole life learning, but somehow you make it seem like they're part of who you are, and then you explain them in an easy to understand way. And I want to learn how you do that. So let's start off with the big vision, so we know where you're going with this. What do you envision in the future coming out of this?
Yeah, well, people know about the videos. I'm going to keep making videos. That's probably the highest return on my time. I was talking to a foundation yesterday, and they're like, what do you envision in yourself in 5 years? I spent, at least 60% of my time is still going to make videos. There's an infinite amount of knowledge, and as you know, I teach things that are not necessarily in my core expertise, but I make them part of my core expertise so I can teach them. But beyond just the video library, I see it becoming a free virtual school, and what I think that entails is you have a video library, you have self-paced adaptive exercises. You can call them adaptive if you like. That's already built. I actually started building that before I started working on the videos. The videos are actually a complement to the software piece, and people can log in. It's at khanexercises.appspot.com, and it's all free. You just need a Google account. It's on App Engine, and people started coming out of the woodwork to start working on that. So it's an open source project on top of that. It not only will Khan Academy be a virtual school, but that code can then be used for anyone else if they want to make their own island of education if they want. But the idea is you have the videos, you have exercises that start you at 1 + 1 = 2, work you all the way up, and they're dynamically generated, work you all the way up. Right now they go through about algebra. The videos go well beyond that. But the exercises, I want them to go through calculus and chemistry and those to keep building out. And we collect data on everything. We know what videos you watched, when you've watched the videos, what exercises you've watched. We'll do heuristics on when you're stuck. And then what I think would kind of complete the picture as a virtual school is leverage the community to do actual peer-to-peer instruction. So if I know that Andrew is having trouble with negative exponents and Sal, who lives in Mountain View, knows negative exponents, and I know both of your schedules, I'll set up a peer-to-peer interaction, and then you and I will have a session not too different than I was having with my cousins 4 years ago, and then we'll also record it. So it also becomes part of this library, and then we can collect all of this data around, was that a good interaction? I'll rate you, you'll rate me. And then we can also see if there are statistically significant outcomes on your performance. And I think there's a lot to be said. In the for-profit world, there's a lot of people doing video libraries, and they're doing different ways to collect data on it and have the best videos. Then there are other people who are doing exercises, and then there are other people who are starting to explore the peer-to-peer learning. But I'm pretty convinced in order to do it properly, you want to have them all of them together in the same place.
Okay, so we got the videos today. You talked about what you have up on App Engine. I played with that game for a little bit. It's interesting. You get to learn, and then you go into a place where you take quizzes based on what you've learned. So to use the example that I played with, it was what's 9 plus 5, and if I didn't know the answer, I could press the button to see a hint, and the hint showed me balls underneath 9, and then if I still didn't know the answer, I would hit the hint again, and I would see 5 balls under 5, and then I could answer it, and you keep track of it. So you've got that today, and in the future you're going to add peer-to-peer, and you mentioned that there are other people who are already doing this. What about people like Cramster, who's doing this already, or who else? Who did I interview here? I interviewed the founder of University of the People, Shai. He wants to create an online university. How does this fit in with what's already out there?
I think a lot of the focus so far has been on platform, and I'm not 100%. I'm somewhat familiar with both of those two efforts that you've had, and I think in order to make these work, platform matters, but the platform really has to have a core of really good content. And that's what's going to make people use the platform. And I think, right now the value proposition, and I think the reason why Khan Academy has a lot of traction is because it has, when people say, what is Khan Academy? It's 95% content and 5% platform. But I think that's what gives us the ability to eventually turn it into 95% platform, maybe 50-50, 50% platform. So I don't know what these other efforts are, but I have, I've even advised a few startups in the Valley about, education, that, and, without trying to be too blunt about it, I think a lot of their problem is that, there are a couple of MBAs, they have this big picture idea, which is not an incorrect idea, but I think they downplay the value of good instruction, or they downplay the value of really good content, which I think is super important in education.
All right, let's go back to how you started this. I feel like I feel like everyone probably knows it already, but they can't possibly. Can you tell people? And the reason I feel that is because lately, in our space, in the entrepreneurial space, people keep talking about you. I saw you on Hacker News. I saw your story on Jason Fried's site. Of course, a lot of us are NPR nerds. We heard your story there. For anyone who didn't hear how it started, can you tell them?
Yeah, I was. Well, it depends how early you want to go. I mean, if you go back to college, I always did have this vision of kind of creating a holy grail of at the time I thought it would be like a software-based education platform. But then obviously my career got derailed. I ended up at a hedge fund. We're in 2004 now. My cousin and uncle and aunt were visiting me from New Orleans. My cousin Nadia was having trouble. Well, it just came up in conversation that she was not placed into pre-algebra for 7th grade. And then I said, hey, that's a big deal. You don't realize it. It seems like a harmless thing in middle school, but then she's not going to take algebra in 8th grade. She's not going to take calculus when she's a senior, and that's going to really limit her career opportunities, or if she wants all of these other byproducts, and even her own self-confidence. So, and she's a really bright girl. She was a really bright girl then. It was pretty obvious. So I made a deal with her. I was like, hey, if you are willing to work with me half an hour a day after your school and my work, I'll tutor you remotely. I'll be in Boston. You'll be in New Orleans. And she agreed, and we started doing it. And we just used Yahoo Doodle and a conference call, and it ended up working out really well. I mean, even within a couple of months, she had not only done pre-algebra, she was working on algebra stuff, and then I started working with her brothers, and then other family members and family friends, and a couple of things popped in my mind. I was like, wow, one-on-one teaching people really works, even if it's virtual, which is might be kind of obvious. But I was like, gee, I wish there was a way that I could make this scale a little bit, or at minimum make it a little bit easier for me to logistically handle everything that I'm doing. And so I did two things. I started working on the software. I started doing that before the videos, because I wanted, when I started tutoring even Nadia, I would point her to random websites, and I'd say, hey, there's some exercises there. Why don't you play around with them? And I didn't know what she did. When she did the exercise, I was very data focused, and I was like, well, I kind of have to take her word for it, how she felt about it. So I keep pointing her to different things. I was like, well, let me just write my own little JavaScript scripts to generate problems, and then let me put a little database behind it so I can track when she's doing it, how long it's taking her, all of that type of thing. And then a buddy literally said, hey, why don't you add some videos there? Because I was kind of telling them about, yeah, these kids, I keep having to do the same lecture over again. It's getting hard to schedule. I have 5 or 10 kids that I'm working with, and I have a day job. And they said, why don't you make YouTube videos? It might be useful for them. And so I tried it out, and the initial feedback I got from my cousins was that they liked me better on YouTube than in person, or virtually, or live. And I think that the takeaway is that it was less stress. They could pause and repeat. They could do it on their own time. There was none of this scheduling situation. So I got that feedback from them. Other people started watching the videos, and other people started sending these notes like, hey, I got an A on my algebra exam because of this. And at first it might have been one note a week or one note a month, but it got me pretty excited. And the idea started to crystallize that, gee, if I make this library, even if it's just useful to my family, like my cousins who are using it now, and I didn't have a son at the time, but my future kids and anyone, that's like just a huge, gift to our family. And if other people end up using it, that's even more neat. So it kind of became a fun outlet for me. I was working, we had moved out to Palo Alto a year after that. So I was working East Coast hours. So I was done with work by about 2 p.m. My wife was in medical residency. So I had a lot of time, and I was like, this is a fun use of my time, and it was kind of an outlet for me to get this kind of these educational ideas off my plate. And I loved mathematics. It was also a way to engage parts of my brain that I hadn't engaged in a while. So it was just a lot of fun, and it was actually having an impact. So and then fast forward 4 years, at September of 2009, and take it from there. And then now we have 16, 17 million views, and it's the most used open course library.
September 2009 being the day you quit, being the month you quit your work so that you can do this full time.
Right.
You know what I'm wondering as you're saying this? If I had a relative who wanted to learn math or wanted to learn anything, I might help them once. And then after that, I might refer them to a website where they can go and learn after that. Why would you spend so much time? Hey, you've got a job, you've got other things going on.
Well, I think it's it was fun. Look, if you work at a hedge fund, it was a great job. And I have to say, the hedge funds I worked for, and I worked for one hedge fund in particular for 6 years, it wasn't the typical, really high power type A type place. It was a really intellectual, thoughtful type of firm. My boss was a really great guy, really focused on kind of work-life balance. But at the same time, and it was a really good job, but there wasn't a lot that you could say, what have I contributed to the world today? And and even the nature of the hedge fund job itself, you could do really good analysis, and that investment goes nowhere, and then you could get lucky, and you could do so. There's a lot of that, and so that you almost crave for something that you do every day, where you feel like I did this for X hours, and that X hours was a positive contribution to something. It made the pie a little bit bigger, and I think that's what it gave me a little bit of purpose, and it gave me an outlet, and it made me feel like I wasn't, I talked to a lot of my friends who are roughly at my stage in my career, and I was like, it kind of dawned on me that, look, your life is pretty valuable. And what I was doing at the hedge fund, and I don't want it to mean, I think it's a great job, but, I'd spent 6 years of my life, but really what I had to show for it was I had experience. I learned to analyze securities better, and I saw a lot about how businesses work and all of that. But what I really had to show for it was just some numbers in a bank account someplace. Like I really had no actual tangible contribution to show for it, and this gave me that outlet where I felt like these years weren't wasted. And I feel that more and more. Every day I almost feel like my day is wasted if I don't make a few videos, or if I don't write a little bit of software, if I just sit a whole day in meetings, or if I'm trying to fundraise or whatever else. I feel like I'm not doing what the Khan Academy is supposed to be doing.
Did you think at the time that this might help you prepare for the school you'll launch someday, or did you think that maybe this would lead to a school or software that I can create and sell? What did you think it was going to lead to?
Once it got to about once the JavaScript modules, once I had I would say about 20 of them, and it was and I was using it with my cousins and family friends, and they were using it. It really was teaching them. And then you combine that with the videos, and once the video library got to about 100, and the combination of it really was pretty good at teaching people pre-algebra through algebra. I started to think very seriously, the school of the future needs to have something like this as its operating system, needs to have something like this at its DNA. So I did, and actually I do view this virtual school that we talked about earlier as, it is a virtual school. It could stand on itself. People can go to that virtual school and use it to learn things independent of anything else, but it can also be used as as the operating system or the DNA for a physical school, where you have a one-room schoolhouse, kids of all ages. You don't. It's actually a very bizarre way that people connect age with different concepts. So you have students of all ages in a room together. They're working on, for part of their day, not their full day, for part of their day, they're using technology to kind of get their core skills going. If they don't understand something, there are other people in the room that are going to help them. So you have a lot of peer-to-peer occurring in the room. It could even occur across site. And then the rest of the day is spent doing real project-based learning. I mean, there's a lot of talk about project-based learning, but not much of it is substantive. I mean, real project-based learning was, kids are actually learning to program. Like, they're really working, building things. They're actually writing things that are being published. They're actually composing music instead of just learning to play music. So that's the whole aspect. So I definitely wanted this to become eventually and it does seem like it is becoming the DNA of a possible framework in school. I did it with a couple of summer camps, and the teachers wanted reports. Can I see, all the students where they are? And we pretty quickly settled on a kind of a paradigm where the teacher would walk into the room, all the kids are working at their own pace, and the teacher just gets a spreadsheet saying, look, everyone's fine, but those two kids are having trouble with adding and subtracting negative numbers. And so instead of the teacher giving a lecture and all of that type of stuff, the teacher just takes those two kids aside, does a very intimate session with them, and let everyone else work at their own pace. And then who are the next two people who need help? And you could even, before the teacher even gets involved, you could have other peers help and all of that type of thing. So, and you get more and more technology in it. You can get more and more data on it. You can make everyone's life a lot more streamlined and be able to do much more intelligent things on where you point people's energies.
I could so see the passion as you talk about this. I can't imagine you were this passionate about hedge funds or venture capital or any of the previous work.
I was.
You were.
I mean, I guess now that I'm not working in those industries, I can say it. I guess you have to. I mean, those were. I think outside of the Khan Academy, my job as a hedge fund was probably the best possible job. I mean, what was fun about it, as you mentioned earlier, I teach out of my core competency. So a lot of what I do is I really learn new things, and I try to learn it at a really deep level. And that's really what I had to do with my hedge fund job, where, every day we talk to an oil company, the next day we talk to a internet marketing company, and the next day we talk to a chicken egg company. So it was this kind of process of you're always learning new things, and you have to kind of become a quick expert.
I see. All right, so you get these videos online. I understand how today, when you have, how many videos do you have?
We're a little over 1,500.
A little over 1,500. I understand when you get to even 500 to 1,000 videos, it starts to feel like something. When NPR comes and interviews you, when the BBC has you on, it starts to feel like something. But what about when it was just 100 or 200? Do you ever feel at those moments, well, I'm just a YouTube producer. It's me and the guy who's creating the cat videos. And he's got more viewers than I do.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think in the past year, a lot of friends and family are trying to say, hey, yeah, what Sal's doing is great. But I think if you go back 3-4 years ago, and I was kind of just going into sometimes the guest room and eventually a converted closet and making these YouTube videos, a lot of what's Sal doing? Why is he spending all of his time doing this? I had a lot of friends who kind of like, this is kind of weird. What he's
Tell me about how that felt, because it's easy to look back and say, that's what happened and we got through it. Tell me about how that felt, so that when I have that situation in my life, or one of our listeners has it in their lives, where they're just like 100 videos into a 1,000,000 video project, the way you were back then, and no one believes in them, and they doubt themselves, they could identify with you. So what was it like for you?
Well, I think what allowed me to kind of keep up a high level of energy and stay motivated and want to do it is that I didn't care if it ever got to where it did get. I was pretty happy with the, I guess you call them small successes. I was excited that 20 people a day were watching, 20 people who I didn't know were learning math from me. And the idea that even if I were to get hit by a bus, 20 people a day, even if it didn't grow at all, would still learn math from me, that to me was a pretty profound concept. And so for me, just a couple of notes a day and that idea were enough for me to say, hey, this is a project worth my time. I mean, it is, if at minimum, no non-relatives watch it, but if my son, when he's 18 years old, is able to learn a little bit of algebra or calculus from me, that by itself makes it worth it. I mean, that by itself makes it a neat project. And so I think in those early days, I was excited about the that small impact. That was enough. Now, and in the back of my mind, it was growing. I said, well, if it keeps growing at this rate, then right now there's 20. Next month there might be 30, and boy, in a year we'd have a couple of thousand. In 2 years, exponential growth. That happens pretty fast. And so that I was like, that'd just be gravy on top of everything else if it happened.
Did you have a moment where you doubted it, where you were down on it, where you said, "What am I doing here, in the closet or on my computer, wherever it was"?
I never did. Although I did have a lot of, I did have, I never doubted it, and I'll tell you one of the, I'm a bit of a stubborn character, and I did early on have people say, "Who do you think you are?" Like, I've had friends who are school teachers, who are academics, and not all of them. Some of them were very supportive. They thought it was cool. And in general, I got kind of the negative pushback from people who never experienced the videos. I think there's two camps. People who actually experienced the videos and said, wow, this is kind of a cool way to learn, and it was strangely engaging and strangely addictive, and it kind of got me excited about things, and it was kind of entertaining. And those people were almost universally supportive. But a very small subset of people who are close to me actually did that. They actually took the time to experience them. A lot more people I know were like, there's billions of dollars being spent on education. There's thousands of people with PhDs spending their whole life on fixing the education system. Isn't it arrogant of you to think that you and your YouTube videos are going to have any type of impact? I mean, that's essentially the summary of what a lot of people would tell me. And, I would defend it a little bit at first, and I'd be like, well, I mean, in the back of my mind, I would say, well, I think a lot of those efforts, they're just spent on bureaucracies and people talking about things like that. But I wouldn't say that. My response was, well, you're right. I don't think it's going to, I just want to do my own little small thing, and if it has any impact, it has any impact. But in the back of my mind, it made me really angry, and it motivated me even more to make more and better videos, and to do it in, to some degree, that's what. Like the history videos you talk. Every time I made a small set of videos, I start with pre-algebra and algebra. I'd always get some push. Oh yeah, that's nice and cute what you have there, but this won't work for calculus, or this won't work for differential equations or physics. And I'd be like, oh yeah, maybe you're right. But then I'd go home and say, I'm going to show that person. I'm going to make some calculus and differential, and then you immediately get the pushback. Oh well, this might work for that, but it won't work for the humanities. It won't work, and you won't be able to do that. You're going to have to get other people. I mean, it's amazing how many people still tell me. So you're going to have to get more people on. I mean, and I'm open to it. I'm not like against getting other. In fact, when I started, I thought that's how this would happen. That there would be 20 of us doing a large, but it was actually hard to. A lot of people would say, "Yeah, that's awesome." At parties, they'd be like, "Yeah, I want to make videos, and that'd be so cool." But when it actually comes down to actually sitting down with the tablet and recording YouTube videos, no one really did it. And so even now, there's a lot of assumption of like, "Oh, well, you're not going to be able to do all of K through 12," and I'm like, "Well, look, part-time for 4 years, I was working at a hedge fund most of the time. It's pretty much 90% of K through 12 math has been done." And you extrapolate that full time, it's not going to take long to do. And I'm not going to say that I'm the only person. I actually want other people to do this, but they're not doing it. So if they're not doing it, and I want to do it anyway, so I'm going to do it. It is a bit of a motivating force when people kind of question your validity or your ability to execute on something. I think it ignites the fire in the belly a little bit.
Yeah, I've seen that. I felt that in myself too. All right, so how do you do it? How do you do it so well? Let me just, actually, why don't you start out by describing it? Maybe I should have done that earlier in the interview, but I think, but why don't we start out with you describing it first?
Yeah, the videos, you don't see me. They're a black background, almost universally. Some of them don't have black backgrounds, but they have black backgrounds, and I'm just writing in colors that I think look nice while I talk, while I narrate the video. And the form factor, started two things. This was essentially what Nadi was experiencing when I was doing those initial live virtual sessions with her. She didn't see me. We just had a conference call going, and she just saw what I was writing. And so it worked with her, so I said that'll probably work. And I also wanted it to I didn't have good recording equipment. I didn't have a video camera. And even if I did, I even thought about at one point maybe buying one, but it's really difficult. Even if you get a nice video camera, you have to get your lighting right, then you have to get your own microphone. I mean, all sorts of crazy things you have to do to make it look professional. But if you just do screen capture with a USB headset, and I started with Microsoft Paint, and now I'm using a little fancier stuff, but I'm still using Smooth Draw 3. It's a piece of freeware. it comes off a lot better. And the feedback I get from people, and it's kind of obvious, now in hindsight, is it's actually a much more intimate form factor. It doesn't feel like I'm on the other side of a room lecturing to you. It literally feels like we're either beside each other and we're looking at the same blackboard or the same piece of paper, or it even feels like I'm, what my narration is your thoughts on some level. And so, I think so the form factor both, I think, is compelling to a lot of students, and it's really easy for me. I literally just have to press record, start the screen capture going. I don't have to comb my hair. I don't have to shave. I don't have to do anything. And I just start talking and start teaching. The question of how I do it, things like a lot of the algebra content, a lot of, I do a lot of that real time, very conversational. A lot of the example problems I do, in the early videos, I actually made them up on the fly, which I realize is, that kind of wastes a little bit of time. But I always do them on the fly. And I think that gives students a lens into concepts that they don't normally see. I mean, in the textbook or in a traditional lecture, you always have the finished product. The teacher has seen the example, they've done the example, maybe they've done it 6 times that day for the last 20 years. And you never see you never see the art of the problem, and you never see it solved in real time. And I get a lot of feedback. Students like to see me go down a little path and say, "Oh, wait, that's not right." But I did it because it looked like that. But let me back up and go down this other path. So they really appreciate that informal, conversational, kind of thinking out loud style. For the more kind of preparation intensive topics, like when I did cellular respiration or the French Revolution. I mean, these aren't things that I was exposed to them in my education, but they weren't something that I would, like, if you had bumped into me 2 years ago and said, "Sal, tell me how many ATPs are generated by this stage of cellular respiration," I would have been like, "Well, I took it a long time ago." So those type of things, I do spend a lot of time immersing myself in the subject matter.
So tell me about that. Tell me about the process. How do you absorb that knowledge, and then we'll get into how do you share a tough topic with someone else? How do you teach it? So how do you get the knowledge in your head so quickly?
I try to. I just try to read as many things as I can, and I think to some degree, I don't know. Obviously, Khan Academy is dependent on the web. It needed YouTube and all of that, but it also needed the web for my own preparation, because in kind of the old days, you'd only have one source. You'd have your textbook or whatever, and that's very limiting. But now you literally, you have textbooks, you have things like Wikipedia. You have random professors, random people on the web explaining concepts. 90% of them are explaining it the same way, but that 10%, they'll say something and it just clicks in your brain. It's like, oh, why didn't everyone just say that? That's the most. And then you have all these other, I'm actually a big fan of, I think, this is kind of a commentary on the publishing industry. I think textbooks are written not to teach. Textbooks are written to impress school boards and to be these impressive, weighty, tomes, as opposed to something that a student could digest. I actually think a lot of the teach yourself books that you get in the library for $10, or the Barron's calculus, all the easy way, biology the easy way. These are actually really good texts. Like, they shouldn't be downplayed. And you start with something like that, and then when you have questions, you're like, okay, that kind of gave me the overview, but I still don't understand exactly what happens at this stage or that stage. Then you can use text as reference, dig deeper, use Wikipedia as a reference. And then when I really get to some, really core question, I was doing immunology, which I'm not an expert in. And I was, in one part of my wife's immunology textbook, she's a doctor, so she has her immunology textbooks from medical school, and I was digging through it. In one part of it, it was saying, B cells, they need to be exposed. They need to be exposed to the antigen to be activated. And another part, it says, oh, well, helper T cells activate B cells. So I had this question. I was like, does both have to happen, or just one of them? And I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find the answer. So I literally just called up a friend who's a professor of virology at Duke, and I asked him. I was like, look, I know this is a really stupid question. You're going to judge me because you're like, why does Sal, I shouldn't be doing immunology videos if I don't know the answer to this question. And I asked him, I was like, which one? He's like, oh, that's actually a very interesting question. There's certain types of B cells, and he's like, it's an area of research of why that is, and this and that. And it's completely not in the textbook. And so I think very quickly, as long as you're really kind of, if you're asking yourself the right questions and you really are focused on getting down to a distilled intuition of a subject, it doesn't take long before you can really get to kind of fundamental questions that even experts in the field will say, hey, that's an interest. This is another, I talk to a lot of friends who have PhDs, are professors, or doing PhDs or whatever, and sometimes if I meet them at a party, I'm like, oh, I'm going to do a video on this. probably next week. And I have this one question about it's like a fundamental concept, something that first year grad student should know. And they're like, you know what? That's something I always wondered, but I really didn't have time to address it in my education, and I had qualifiers to pass, and I was probably embarrassed to even bring it up inside of my department, and so I really don't know the answer to that. And one, that makes me feel a lot better, but then we would kind of become on a mission combined to get that question answered, and I would be kind of their layperson that say, hey, this guy's wondering, and so I, if you want to know kind of where I think I'm adding value beyond people who have spent more time in the field, is that I have the luxury of spending as much time as I want on core concepts, and I think core concepts are the most important because that's where you build your intuition of a subject. When I started doing chemistry, before I even started, I just played with the periodic table for like a week, just to make sure I understood the nuance. Why was it structured that way? Why is the pattern? How did it come about? As opposed to, it's just there, and how do you interpret it? How did the first people even think of making a periodic table and things like that? And I get that luxury, and PhDs and grad students and professors don't have that luxury of really understanding. A friend of mine, I haven't done quantum mechanics videos yet, and I had a friend who was explaining to me a little bit, and he's like, oh yeah, if you have this electron, it's moving in this chamber, it's this theoretical chamber, and I was like, oh, why is it moving? Why is it changing direction? And he's like, that's a good question. I mean, it's like one of these fundamental examples that every first-year quantum mechanics student learns, and the teacher doesn't go over that, and they just say, oh, and they give the equation, you kind of learn to mimic it, and so on and so forth. But everyone's afraid to ask these very basic questions. I ask them, eventually I get an answer to them, and I think when I teach it, I'll answer those questions, and then people don't have those gaps in their head.
It seems like the Khan Academy is great for teaching Khan, for teaching you, because you now are going through the ideal university. Can you talk about how knowing that you're going to teach what you're learning affects what you're learning? How it impacts?
Oh yeah, I mean, it puts the bar so much higher. I mean, I think in most, like I'm going to start doing organic chemistry soon. And when you're taking organic chemistry, and I took organic chemistry in college, your goal is really to get an A. And if you're especially intellectually inspired, maybe to get another level of understanding, but there's all of these other pressures that are going on in college, or grades and social pressures and other classes and all of that. And now I know I'm going to explain it, and I know, from the math videos, there's a certain brand, there's a certain standard that people expect, that I'm not just going to throw something at you and say, memorize this. Or I'm not just going to say, like, oh, this is beyond you, don't try to understand it. The standard people expect from me is that I will give them an intuition, and I will distill it down into concept where people say, oh, wait, that's obvious. That's all that thing is saying about the universe. And so that's the standard I hold myself to when I learn it. So it doesn't take long, actually, to learn something of a level where you can get an A on most exams at most schools. But it's a whole other level where you're getting to the really deep, why is this intuitive? Or why does that expression look the way it does? Or how is it related to another expression? And so it's hugely motivating while I'm learning. I mean, it keeps me going a little bit deeper than I think most anyone would if they were just doing it for getting a credential.
Don't medical schools teach by showing, doing, teaching method, where the student gets to learn it, gets to do it, and then has to teach it to someone else, because when you teach it, you really absorb it?
Yeah, no, and I'm a huge believer in that. I mean, that's, when I talk about the virtual school, that's why I think the peer-to-peer is huge. I think mastery comes not just from being able to do a lot of problems. It really comes from that exercise of teaching it. And I found it with my own experience. But if you have kids all over the world teaching each other, and that's why you have that one-room schoolhouse, all of a sudden, I think you're just going to have a whole other level of mastery that doesn't exist right now.
All right. So how do you teach? How do you teach tough topics? Teach us how to teach, because we're all going to have to teach our employees. We're going to have to teach people who we work with. We're going to have to teach others online.
Right. Well, I think there's a couple of things here, and you brought up an interesting point just now when you talk about teaching employees and teaching other. I'm actually advising some tech companies where they want to build type applications on their platform and this and that. And at first, I was writing like traditional specs, like you would expect, product manager or whoever would write at a company. I was like, this is silly. I make YouTube videos. Why don't I just do YouTube specs? So I would literally just make a screenshot, and I would just explain what the interaction should look like, and it's 10 times better. So I think to a large degree, just the form factor makes it way better than if I were to write a white paper, write a spec, or even if I were to sit at a whiteboard and my hands and faces are distracting you. So one, I think the form factor of screen capture with hand-drawn writing is pretty powerful. Some people have told me that cognitively, just seeing typing or seeing a PowerPoint presentation doesn't really stimulate the brain, but seeing someone write something out, handwritten, actually does. And I kind of feel like that. I mean, it's also easier for me to produce. But beyond that, I think there's, what I do is just get as comfortable as you possibly can with the subject, but once you get that comfort, don't script the video. Make it as relaxing as possible. Have fun while you're doing it. There's actually a gentleman who's going to start translating some of the videos into Urdu, and my one feedback, he did some great videos, but I was like, have more fun. Like if energy carries over in a voice, especially when you don't see the face, you really have to have a lot of energy in your voice, and if you're not having fun, the student won't have fun. And so have fun, be relaxed, but really know what you're talking about. Like, don't throw out buzzwords without really knowing what is going on behind it. So if you're at a company, I actually think the way Khan Academy teaches would actually be ideal, instead of white papers, instead of a lot of what goes on inside of companies to teach people how to do things, is look, you just teach your peers and teach it as it really is. Don't try to look smart yourself by throwing out buzzwords that you don't necessarily understand, or that you heard someone else that you think is smart say. Just say it in as down to earth of a style as you can. Be frank if there's something that you don't understand, and I think people will respond well to it.
What about the way that you give background before you get into the subject? How do you do it?
I think through this process of making 1,500 videos, I've gotten very good at being a train of thought. And I think a lot of people, when they teach, they actually close down, they actually shut off a lot of their thoughts that would be maybe embarrassing. That but when I do a problem, I mean, there is a little bit of a neuron that reminds yourself that a negative times a negative is a positive, and maybe even remind yourself why that is, and remind yourself, all of these things while you're doing a problem, and I lay all that stuff out there. So even if you're watching the vector calculus videos, it's literally, I don't assume anything. I'm literally doing stream of consciousness. Every thought that's going in my brain, you're actually getting on paper. So there's no skip steps, if you will. I think there's that. Before I do the video, I do try to really make sure I understand the big picture really well. And probably, I think what you're talking about, where I give the background, that's me articulating the big picture, just so I have a framework in my head of what we're even doing. I think a lot of times, in all subjects, once you start getting into it, you almost forget what you're doing in the first place. And while I'm doing it, I like to remind myself, what are we even doing? Like, we're on step 50 of this equation. What was the whole point to begin with? And so it's good to remind yourself. It's good to remind yourself in the beginning. And it's not some artificial teaching technique. It's literally, I'm reminding myself. I'm reminding myself, this is why we're doing this problem right now. And I think it's valuable for the student. I think whatever keeps my energy level up while I do the video will also keep up the engagement and the energy level of the person observing the video.
I see. And people have to get that French Revolution. I can recommend it before I've even finished watching it. It was so good. You even gave us a little bit of background, and you said, well, the French supported America in the American Revolution. I thought, wow, I wouldn't have thought to include something like that, but it really does help me understand what's about to happen here. It does. It's a great reminder. How do you make it feel interactive when it's just you and it's not even your face in the video? How do you make it feel like you're engaging the person?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think, once again, we talked about the form factor, how it looks, but it's also, the videos are on average about 10 minutes. These history videos go a little bit longer than that. But I think because it's 10 minutes, the person goes into that video wanting that video. So it's not like they're getting a 90-minute lecture, which may engage for them for part of it. I mean, it's almost like the act of clicking on a video is almost like asking a question. Like, tell me more about the French Revolution, or tell me more about, Napoleonic campaigns in Russia. And so it's literally just addressing that exact need you have right there. And I think the other things is, I think it's the form factor. It's a little bit of my tone. I'm conversational. Literally the tone I use in the videos is not at all different than the tone I'm using right now. It's not at all like a lecture, the next step in this price. It's not that at all.
How many of them do you do a day?
Depends what I'm doing. When I was doing French Revolution, or when I'm doing some of the more complex biological, biochemistry type mechanisms, then I'm lucky to be able to do 2 or 3 in a day. And there's other things that are taking up my time now, which I'm trying to shut off. I mean, running an organization. Well, I'm trying to automate as much of that as possible. But Right now I'm doing a lot of worked examples for the Monterey Institute in Algebra 1 worked examples, where they just gave me a bunch of examples. I said, yeah, I'll do them for you as long as I can put them on Khan Academy. And these are literally just algebra problems. So I'm doing right now about 10 videos a day for the algebra problems.
And who is this for? For the Monterey?
The Monterey Institute of Technology and Education. They got a grant to build this course and this and that. And this is another interesting thing. As going back to what we talked about at the beginning, a lot of people in the world are talking about making open video content available, and we should get good teachers to put stuff up, and we'll do all this analytics. When it comes to execution, they had gotten this, and I told them, I was like, look, I don't know what you're doing or how much money you're spending on it, but whatever you're spending on it, I'm sure I'll be able to do it for like a tenth of the cost, as long as you're willing to donate it to Khan Academy. And I think you're going to find it more engaging because it's not going to be scripted. It's just going to be, and they're like, oh, great, we've written all the problems. We can send you the scripts. I was like, don't send me the scripts. It'll ruin everything that, is good about the Khan Academy. And so they sent it, and, I've, over, 10 videos a day, you can churn out about 100 videos in, not too long, and they'd be done. And I think when they probably started, they thought it was this huge, grand project, but it'll actually be done in a couple of weeks.
I've got one other question here, and I wasn't sure if I should ask it or not, but I've got to ask it because I think it's important. You and your wife, you moved to one of the most expensive parts of the country, right? You're living in Northern California. You're living around people who are making tons of cash. I gotta believe you've got some expectation of lifestyle, and your wife does too. And suddenly you come home September and you say, "Honey, I quit." How do you deal with that? How do the two of you come? How do you deal with that? What's the story there?
Well, I think it's I think the Sal before marriage and before son would have been much more obsessed with kind of keeping up with the peers in terms of lifestyle and all of that. But I think once when I really seriously introspect on where I find joy in my life, it really does not come from we're not living like I have saved enough from my hedge fund days. I mean, but not a lot by Valley standards, but enough for me to not feel like living off of savings for a year was going to kill us or prevent my kid from going to college or anything like that. So I'd saved enough there, and we live in a 2,200 square foot house in a nice part of Mountain View, which is not the fanciest neighborhood, but it's a really nice neighborhood, and it's the weather's good. And
did you have to convince her? Did you have to explain to her, listen, I got to do this? Or did she understand? I think a couple of the first few iterations when I thought about it, she was very like, wait, you're going to give up that job where, every year you're making 50% more than the year you made before. You're going to, I mean, the thing about these careers like hedge funds or banking is that they say, well, hey, stick around next year and you're going to make more than you made the last 5 years combined. And you're like, gee, that's, maybe I should. And she's like, my wife is not materialistic at all, but for anyone, it's just like, gee, that would really like not only allow us to, we could buy a nice house, and then we could even support our parents. And I mean, there's all sorts of things, you can always think of more things to do with resources. But when you really kind of sit down and think about, I used to play a game with a lot of friends of like, how much is enough, right? Like how much, like what do you need so that you really don't need, and everything above that is just gravy and some type of competitive whatever, who knows. And, people out here, they throw out 5 million, 10 million, 15, I mean, and that's way above enough. I mean, for me, enough was below 7 figures. And so, I'm now taking a salary with Khan Academy. I quit my job, convinced that like, gee, I'm a complete dummy if I don't convince someone that this is the highest return on social investment. I mean, for the cost of a preschool, we can be educating millions of people for all of time. And it's not even like a school where if the funding dries out that the school disappears. No, the content will be there. It'll be there on iTunes and YouTube forever. And so, I was like, gee, I got to be able to convince somebody. And it is kind of, and being in the Valley has been a big benefit there, because I think people here more than anywhere, one, there is capital, people have resources, and they see that. They're not as swayed by the touchy-feely, nice picture and please give some money and help. They understand things at scale. They understand when there's something that has broad impact, and they understand return on investment. And so,
Yeah, I mean, I kind of veered off track a little bit, but I think the simple answer is I had enough, and that enough was below seven figures, but enough that I could put a down payment on a 4-bedroom house in Mountain View. We have, you know, two relatively new Hondas, and I'm now able to take a salary from Khan Academy doing exactly. You know, I tell people if you wrote me a check for $5 billion 5 years ago, I would have probably bought a house, maybe a little nicer than this house, but but my day would have been spent making YouTube videos. It wouldn't have changed, and now I get to do it anyway. And so you know, why chase the $5 billion, which already would have a low probability of happening anyway? And I'd probably just end up, you know, 40 or 50 years old, just probably with some amount of money in my bank, and just say, gee, what have I done? Like, I haven't had, you know, now Khan Academy every day I'm excited about what I've done. I was like, hey, I did these videos, kids are already watching it. This is gaining momentum. It can turn into a new type of school. I mean, it boggles the mind. I tell my wife every day, I mean, literally every night I'm boggled by how fortunate I am that this like wide open opportunity to do something really big is just there, and no one's been doing it. I mean, and I want more people to do it. I don't want it to be like, you know, only Sal, but it's this wide open opportunity to really change things. Like, all the technology has kind of fallen into place, and I think the way to do it is on a not-for-profit, because I think that's what allowed all of the inertia and the goodwill, and it actually kept me straight in terms of my goals. I think if I did it on a for-profit basis, very quickly I'd be like, oh, in order to monetize it, I have to go to this part of the market and I have to get 19, and I'd start charging for some part earlier than I should, and that people wouldn't even learn. Like, you experienced a Khan Academy video and you say, wow, that's a really good video. And if I put even a 50-cent barrier on that video, you would have never experienced it. And for me, that wouldn't have been fun. Even, let me put it this way: if I had $10 million in the bank, and, you know, and 5,000 people are watching these videos, versus I have 100 grand in the bank and 50 million people are watching the videos, that is a much more satisfying outcome for me than the former. So that's why I'm doing it like this.
Well, this is an incredibly inspiring story. We'll leave it there. I'm grateful to you for coming here and doing this interview. I know you probably could have whipped up 5 different videos today for Khan Academy.
Oh, I know. I have to catch up now.
Sorry?
I have to catch up now.
You have to catch up now.
Yeah.
A few people, as we were talking, came up with suggestions for what you should do to tweak your YouTube video channel to get more viewers. I couldn't understand it well enough to explain to you what they were suggesting. Are you open to those suggestions? Should they email you directly?
Yeah, well, you know, there's a couple of, yeah, they should email sal@khanacademy.org. And you know, the software piece is an open source effort, and the few developers who've started working on it, I mean, they've been rock stars, and I'm very open. They're like, hey, you know, your knowledge map that you drew out, it should have arrows instead of arcs, because, you know, I was like, yeah, put arrows in there. So I'm a big believer in put stuff out there and iterate and keep repeating as quickly as possible, and it should, as long as the people iterating it aren't doing really silly things, it should move forward.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. If you have any feedback, any suggestions, want to be a part of this in any way, sal@khanacademy.com. .org. Right. Sal@khanacademy.org. But you also have the .com.
No, I don't. Somebody in China has the .com. I don't own the .com.
Who is the evil son of a bitch who has the .com, who does not
love
kids enough?
I don't know. Yeah, no, and it actually came off of like, I almost was able to get it, and then someone got, I don't know. There are people more sophisticated at squatting domain names than I am.
I guess so. Somebody get that domain back for him. If anyone out there is listening, get that domain back. All right. Thank you. In all seriousness, thank you for doing this interview, and I'm really looking forward to this weekend of watching your videos.
Oh, great. Thanks a lot.
Cool. Bye.